A summary of the 5 assessment statements that go with wireless networking. Just generally maybe what's here first. So advantages, disadvantages of wireless networks, that's over wired networks primarily, but also to society, you'll see. Hardware, software, there are some terms there that you may not be familiar with. Characteristics of wireless networks, that's where we're looking at specific kinds of wireless networks like WiMAX, Wi-Fi, 3G, and so on. Different methods of network security, that's probably a key one of all these. And then the advantages and disadvantages of each, so 12 advantages and disadvantages of wireless networks. And again, you can read through this on your own, you don't need me to talk through it all, but just the way that the notes are arranged is that you've got the general advantages of wireless over wired: mobility, ease of use, low cost, expandability, pretty straightforward. Also straightforward, the disadvantages: not as fast, lots of interference possible, and definitely security issues. So those are all pretty straightforward, and all of them, just listening to this for 30 seconds probably makes sense to you. But the teaching note does talk about how wireless networks have led to changes in work patterns and social activities and raised health issues. So there's also that take on it. And again, none of this is going to be mind-blowing, but read through it. If you just read through it, you'll be good with it, I think. The way that it has changed our work patterns, being able to work wherever you want, social activities, with wireless everywhere, and the health issues. And there are some here that you might not have thought about before, so do take a look through. 3.1.13. So these notes go into a lot about the pre-wireless wired parts, simply because I think at some point in the curriculum it needed to be stated what a gateway and a firewall and a modem and so on were. You're probably familiar with those. They're not part explicitly of this assessment statement, though all wireless networks will have the wired part that brings you to the wireless. So all my way of saying that this isn't the most important, but you should know this stuff anyway, so do look through. Gateway just lets the signal in. Firewall only lets in certain whitelisted sites. Modem is what converts the digital to analog, and then the analog back to digital as it comes into your system. LAN hub, router, switch, slightly different each, but they distribute the signal. Ethernet cables, you know what those are. So yeah, and then I'm saying here at home, slightly different, because your modem will probably have the firewall built into it, or it'll be built into something else, or maybe the modem and the router are all one box, but pretty straightforward, and you're used to that. But none of that's really wireless. The wireless really doesn't start until here, and it's not that big of a deal. If we're just looking at the actual wireless components, the wireless access point, the thing that's up on the ceiling or sits on your desk with the antennas themselves, and then your network card with your laptop, whatever receives the wireless signal, and the antenna that is either part of that or attached to it. So, oh, right. Does it say software as well? Yeah, right. Okay, sorry, so software as well. Software. Okay, a couple of things here that you definitely will need to either alert yourself to or remember. The 802.11, 802.11n, 802.11b, g, whatever it is, that is the standard. That is the standard, and IEEE is the organization that sets the standard for wireless communication. So you should know that standard. The fact that there are drivers that will run your wireless card and wireless hardware. And then the various parts of the network operating system, or the parts of the operating system which run the network. And on a Mac, you've got your network system preference, system utility for networks with different fun things you can play around with, but not all that important. And I've got a couple of diagrams. So I think that's going to take a little bit longer probably than the first statement. So read through it, be familiar with it. Most of that stuff I think you could just grab out of your head from your regular day-to-day knowledge, but some of it not. So 14. So when it says describe the characteristics of wireless networks, it's talking about different kinds of wireless networks, and they're listed here: Wi-Fi, WiMAX, 3G, 4G, 5G, etc. So This is back to stuff you're more familiar with, I would imagine. But reading through, you will realize that there are differences between 3G, 4G, and Wi-Fi with the speed, the use for which devices, and so on. I would think that the numbers you might not be familiar with are maximum speeds for Wi-Fi. So upper limit, believe it or not, 600 megabits per second. And then range is another good one. Range, 100 meters outdoor, 32 meters indoor. That's a pretty standard number for Wi-Fi. Then the one that you're probably not familiar with, so I'll talk just a little bit about it. You can read through, but all you need to do is take a look at this. For places in the Arctic or in the savannas of Africa or places that don't have infrastructure built already, WiMAX, which is for WiMAX, where's the microwave? M is microwave. So it's microwave towers. They distribute the signal to different other lands and hotspots and so on, but it's a way to leapfrog basically for developing communities and have fast access across a fairly large range. And that's one thing you should know. So slower, I think pretty obviously, than you're going to get with Wi-Fi or 3G. But it's all contained and within one system in a remote place and a range of up to 50 kilometers. That's good to know as well. So lower power, but great big wide range. And then you've got your 3G, your 4G, your LTE, and you can read through some of that, and you should know what speeds and costs and so on are. Then network security. And this is another one where, just like the hardware, there's really no place in the curriculum anymore, except for here, where general security is talked about. Well, I guess it comes in lots of places, but not where you're describing different methods of security, describing different methods of network security. So I'm starting with user ID and passwords, pretty straightforward. Permissions you might not be that familiar with, so read through it. I think you probably encountered them, but you should read through and see how those are related to users and their passwords. So permissions. MAC address probably has come up, but if it hasn't, it's the hardware address. It's the thing that should be carried with your device and prove what device did what in times of crime and so on, though it can be spoofed. But when it's spoofed, you can tell that it's been spoofed. So the MAC address. And just to be clear, right, the MAC address is not the Macintosh, Apple Macintosh, it's the Media Access Control, MAC. So I'm saying that the above were security within a system, and security from and to the outside world. It's encryption, which came up a number of times. It must have. Read through this, the scrambling of code if you're not familiar. And here are some terms that you should stick in your head someplace. WEP, WPA, and WPA2 as protocols for wireless. Though we have talked about encryption protocols, PPTP, L2TP, and SSL before. Firewalls. Finally, here is a good definition of what a firewall is, software or hardware, basically a whitelist. And then some other miscellaneous that aren't that important, frankly. But you're welcome. Well, two-factor authentication is big, of course, nowadays, with any time you're online, having a second way to authenticate that it's you, not just a password. So there's actually quite a bit there, but again, straightforward. It'll take a little bit of time to read through that and make sure that you understand it all, but there's nothing rocket science there. And then 16, evaluate the different advantages of the different things that we just talked about. It basically boils down to the weak links with user IDs and passwords. Passwords is when there are poor passwords. Permissions, this one I'll speak of a little bit, that because the permission is only a small, maybe even a bit, that's either flipped or not flipped for write or read, if it gets corrupted and it's no longer read and ends up being no access, then it's not just that little bit, but it's the whole file that cannot be accessed. So when permissions go wrong, they can cause whole files and file systems indeed to not be able to be accessed, which is a problem. So that's the weakness with permissions. There's the idea that, like I just mentioned, MAC addresses can be spoofed, but you know when they're spoofed. And encryption is great when it's great, but it's not when it's weak. And eventually every encryption technology is caught up with. And firewalls, what am I saying is the weakness here? Well, they just you have to be vigilant. That's where people spend, and organizations spend a whole lot of money to make sure that they have the most up-to-date and best firewalls going. So there is quite a bit there. There really is, but it's not outside of your reach to learn it. And like I said, half of it is familiarizing yourself with it on your own. So that's it.